overnight without proper research. Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen had discovered the X-rays, didn't want to patent it because he felt that this was something that should be shared with the entire world. And he wasn't wanting to profit out of this at all. So essentially people just took it and ran with it. And you saw up there that many of the scientists suffered different types of radiation burns, eventually some leukemia, because they didn't know that this particular substance can cause biological effects or biological diseases. And as they had said, many of them had died a very horrible death, because as we know now, with radiation, it does cause major biological changes, especially affecting your red blood cells when not used properly. So like Clarence Daly, the assistant to Thomas Edison. I didn't even know Thomas Edison had any involvement with the collaboration of putting together fluoroscopic type of equipment, but his assistant also died a very horrible death in which he lost most of his limbs. Now, here's another factoid. Fluoroscopy. Remember we talked about the difference between X-ray and then you had fluoroscopy, which is X-ray, but it's live. Remember that? Long time ago, they put together a fluoroscopic shoebox that you would find in all the carnivals. And it was a very cool attraction because you would go to a tent, where most of these shows are. People would step in this fluoroscopic box and they would be able to see their foot or their foot bones through a screen as they stood on top of it. Pretty cool, right? But now if you think about it, now that we know a lot of stuff about radiation, the X-rays was going through the foot but also being projected up the gonads. Okay? So ovaries and testicles were affected by radiation, and as we know, it can cause birth defects. So, many of those who did this, who participated in this, were kids. Again, not knowing the repercussions. A gentleman took the idea and thought this would be it would be perfect for his business. So he brought these shoe boxes, or had people develop these shoe boxes, applied it to his manufacturing area, and people would come to a shoe store, they would stand on these boxes, and they can properly fit their customers with the right size shoe, because now they can see the foot in relationship to the shoe, right? Do you guys know who Dr. Scholl is? That was him. Okay, so he had a dark side to this. And then as you look at this, they related X-rays with the occult, the paranormal, because again, you didn't see bones unless someone was dead. All right, so they related it to that. And then with the advent of X-rays, pretty soon you had lawsuits. Doctors were getting sued. Before that, you kind of just took the doctor's word for it. So whatever they told you, you're like, okay. Now they say, well, I don't believe you. I think there's something wrong with me, and you're not telling me, so now I can get an X-ray done to prove you're wrong, right? What about the thing about trying to eliminate racism? Wasn't that crazy? Okay. Not crazy at the time, because people were desperate to look for answers. And in fact, radiation did discolorize skin. People went to clinics and hospitals to get rid of moles, blemishes, acne, and so on. And they've also noticed that, hey, when we X-ray certain parts of the skin would lighten up. Well, of course it would be, because you're causing cellular changes within the body. So it is going to do that. But eventually, down the end, you will get radiation burns and you may get cancer. And that is what happened. And if you listen to the video closely, they had said that for some reason or another, most of the records of those studies just kind of disappeared. They were trying to get rid of the evidence. Okay, So what we're going to do here is we're going to be talking about, again, the discovery of X-rays. I will introduce you to some terminology that we will be using from this point on throughout the course, and then we'll talk about the basic characteristics of X-rays. What is X-rays and what can they do? Okay? So here we go. You guys recognize this guy? He was in the video, right? Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen. Know his name, memorize his name. Okay? Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen. Pretty sharp looking guy. It's so funny because when you look at this, it looks like this was just taken just last week, right? Because isn't this the look now? The hair, the beard.
Trends come back.
Trends come back, right? They come full circle. So, and it's so funny because when I first started the program, are you guys familiar with the name Robert Pirelli? Okay, Robert Pirelli was the director here for the program, and it was a director here for over 30 years. And when I started the program 25 years ago, I walked in, okay, not knowing who William Conrad Roentgen was yet. I walked in, and there was a picture of this guy up there where the clock used to be, and he would be up here doing his presentation, and I would be looking up there in the picture, and I said, man, this guy is stuck up on himself. He has his picture up here on the wall. Well, it's so funny because he looked just like this guy. He looked just like him. And then when I saw the picture of Roentgen, I said, oh, okay, makes sense. Okay, but I thought he was a little stuck up. All right. So, in regards to the video, they said in the late 19th century you had scientists who were interested in studying electricity. Okay? They knew electricity existed, but they wanted to find out how it worked. So you had these scientists studying the flow of electricity within a glass tube, the Crookes tube. Okay? It just looks like the funky looking light bulb. And in this light bulb, this Crookes tube, you have two electrodes. You have a negative end and you have a positive end. Right? Just like anything else, right? Negative terminal, positive terminal. So they applied the theory of attraction and repulsion. You guys remember that, right? Like charges repel, unlike charges attract. So you have negative and positive. They would charge up the Crookes tube and study the flow of electrons from negative to positive. These flow of electrons is known as a cathode ray. Okay, you guys need to put that down there somewhere. It's known as a cathode ray. Okay? And they would study these cathode rays within a vacuum tube, this Crookes tube. When it's saying vacuum, essentially what is happening is in the construction of this glass tubing with the negative and positive electrodes, they would suck out as much of the air as possible. That's what vacuum mean. Okay. This is what it kind of looks like. This is an example of what a Crookes tubes look like. So you have a glass tube, you have a negative terminal, you have a positive terminal. They would charge up this glass tube and watch the electrons go from one end to the other. They also know that it existed because in this particular end of the tube, it was laced with what's known as barium platinocyanide. It's a powdery substance that when it interacts with electricity, it would glow. So naturally, when they charged up this glass tube, that end would glow. You guys following? Okay. So particles, and what we're talking about here is the cathode rays. They knew, with this study, that these cathode rays can cause certain material to glow. And in this case, it's what's known as barium platinocyanide. That was the material that they used. This will come to play in the discovery of X-ray when Wilhelm Conrad Roentgen will come into this. Now, this barium platinocyanide, again, glowed when it interacted with electricity. Now the Crookes tube that we're talking about here was the forerunner to your modern day, yes?
Can I get closer? I forgot my glasses and I can't read it.
Sure, if you can pull up your seat somewhere, if you want to sit up here at my desk, that's fine. Do you guys have access to my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, go ahead, have a seat right there if you need to. Or grab that chair, whatever will work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So the Crookes tube was a forerunner to modern day fluorescent lighting, like we have here on our overhead lighting over here. You guys remember how fluorescent tubes look like? Okay, they're pretty much, again, long glass tubings, and within it, it's covered with a powdery substance that when you charged up that tube, it would light up or fluoresce. Now, I remember as a kid, we would go to the dumpsters, my friends and I, and we would look for these type of fluorescent bulbs because, grocery stores and markets and stuff like that would always get rid of them and put them in the dumpsters. Well, we would go look for them, and this was around the time when Star Wars first came out. So we'd take them out of the trash bin, pretend like they were lightsabers, and we'd just go at it, right? We'd go at it, and we'd just smack it. But when there was an impact, when the glass broke, you would see just powdery substance just flying everywhere. Okay? Now I know that's a bad thing, because if you inhale that stuff, it's not good for you, right? The other type of tubing in which it was laced with some kind of glowy material was CRT tubes. Okay? You guys know what CRT tubes are? TV monitors, TV screens. Okay? Some of you guys are too young to remember this, but back in the day when I used to watch TV, the TV tube was this thick. This isn't the widescreen TV. I'm talking about the thickness from the tube to the back of the TV. And the TV tube itself was pretty thick and rounded. But within that tube was also some powdery substance so that when you charged up the TV, it would receive electricity, but in the form of an electrical signal, which turned it into moving pictures. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and move forward. The scientists at that time, can you see okay? You okay? So the scientists at that time believed, and from what they understood, is that these cathode rays stayed within the glass tube. Okay? It didn't travel any further than within the glass tube itself. So now you got this gentleman coming along. Okay? Mr. Roentgen, Dr. Roentgen, Professor Roentgen comes along. He's the professor of physics at the University of Würzburg in Germany. He took an interest to the Crookes tube. Now, he had a different thought about this in that he believed that these cathode rays were not confined to the glass tube and that he thought that they traveled maybe outside of it. But went unnoticed many, many years because people were so distracted at the glowing of the tube that people failed to notice that it travels on the outside. So he says, okay, well, I'm going to conduct my own tests and see how, these cathode rays actually work. Okay? So on November 8, 1895, he took one of these Crookes tubes. Okay? And taking what he knew about these electrical particles causing certain material to glow, this is how he was going to conduct his experiment. By darkening up the room, putting a box over his Crookes tube, and then he was going to place one of those glass plates laced with barium platinum cyanide next to the tube and then charge it and watch the plate grow. Glow, not grow, glow. Okay? Remember that he was an avid photographer, so his basement was not only his laboratory, but it was also his workplace for his hobby in photography. So it was also his dark room. You guys are following so far? Okay? Because this is when it gets really cool. So he puts the blind on all the windows. It's dark. He puts a box on top of his the Crookes tube, and completely forgets where he puts that glass plate, his photography plate that had that barium platinum cyanide. But anyways, he went ahead and charged the glass tube up anyways, and lo and behold, this plate, where he thought he had placed it right next to the tube, was actually, he had inadvertently placed maybe about 2 or 3 feet away from the tube. And he says, oh my gosh, it's glowing. What's going on here? All right? So he repeated this over and over again at different distances from this glass tube in different areas of his laboratory. What do you think happened? Every time he did this test over and over again with slight variations, what happened to that plate?
Glowed.
It would glow. It would glow. He continued to perform these tests, but not only placing in the different areas of his lab, but he would put stuff in the path of that glass tube, such as a book, pieces of wood, rubber, okay, whatever he can place on there. Repeated the test. What do you think happened? It glowed. So now he's saying, okay, this is not just cathode rays, but these are certain types of rays, because now it's not only going through the glass, it's also penetrating certain objects. So this, of course, made him really, really excited, right? Like I'm excited right now. Okay? He also discovered that by placing very thick and dense objects in the path of the plate and the glass tubing, such as metal, okay, just very thick objects, it wouldn't light up. Furthermore, he did more tests by putting his hand, taking a picture, because he also discovered that it was also, this photographic paper that he had in the laboratory was also responding to these x-rays. But the end result would be a picture of his hand. Okay, so he's actually seeing the bones of his hand. All right? You saw the pictures up there where he was taking x-rays of the barrel of his gun, coins, different types of metallic object, and he would get those radiographic impressions of those objects that he would irradiate. But again, not knowing that this radiation was damaging, okay? So up until that point, scientists had said cathode rays only traveled certain centimeters, not long distances. But his tests had proved that these rays were traveling in further distances and also penetrating certain objects. So these were not cathode rays. He said this has got to be something else. Okay? I'll wait for you guys to finish writing and then we'll go on to the next slide. Yeah, so we said, wow, this is cool stuff. Okay. So one evening, remember his laboratory was in the basement. The video said he rarely came up to eat. He was constantly working in his basement. And his wife Bertha knew that he wasn't having an affair because he was actually in the lab all the time. She knew he was there. Okay, kind of like us growing up, and we keep ourselves locked up in our rooms and we're playing Xbox or PlayStation, right? You forget to eat, you never come out. All right, you can be there for 24 hours like vampires. But this is what happened. He convinced his wife Bertha to come down and look at what he was doing, and she was, a little bit perturbed, but she says, "Okay, you know what? Let me see what you're doing. Okay, I'll come down. Show me what you're doing." Okay, he convinced his wife to conduct an experiment with her, and so what ended up happening was the result of the very first recorded radiograph, because he made studies of his hands, but they weren't permanent records. This was the first permanent record, the first radiograph ever taken, and it was that of his wife's hand in 1896. Now, when she saw her hand, what did she say? Was she happy about this?
She was scared.
She was scared because she says, I have seen my own death. People were afraid of this invention. Remember, when it came out, people thought it was some kind of paranormal or supernatural thing going on. It invaded the Victorian concept of keeping yourself protected and covered from the rest of the population, right? So you have x-rays coming out, so not only can you see the bones, but now you have women wanting to cover up themselves with layer and layer of clothes. They got the petticoats, their ankles and necks are covered all the way up here, all the way down to the ankle. And now this invention comes out and say, oh my God, now people are going to be able to see through my skirt. And it scared women from going outside. X-ray glasses, people were going to get X-ray glasses and start looking through their clothing, right? LED light underwear was starting to make its popularity because of Roentgen's discovery. I mean, of course, we know you can't do that, okay? There's no such thing as X-ray glasses yet, but there will be. But we're talking about the 1900s. So, you know, you had layers and layers of clothes, and you know, it's so funny because we're such in a different time, because now we're telling people to put clothes on, right? They're so showing skin, we're saying put clothes on. All right, so here's another image. When you Google the first X-ray, this is another image that comes up, but it's often confused with that of Bertha Roentgen's hand. They look pretty similar, but they're not. This is an X-ray of Albert von Kolliker, was one of his colleagues at the University of Würzburg. He wasn't a physicist like he was. He was actually studying horticulture, plants, and things of that nature. So different arena altogether, but he also convinced this gentleman here to say, you know what, let's take an X-ray of your hand, and he did. So this is another famous X-ray. You guys remember this on the video? So the history behind this is that you had young Eddie McCarthy, young kid, skating in the pond. He slipped, fell, hurt his wrist, went to his doctor, Dr. Frost, and you know, he says, okay, I hurt myself. And he says, you know what, this is going to be interesting because I happen to have a brother also who's a professor, another Dr. Frost, who was also interested in this X-ray machine. And he says, you know what, let's go ahead and take an X-ray of your wrist. Let's check it out. Okay? So they took an X-ray of his wrist. How long did he have to sit there?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Can you imagine sitting there for 30 minutes, not moving? And if you think about it now, because we know what radiation does, okay? But when you're being exposed 30 minutes under radiation, I'm thinking, oh my God, that's just ridiculous, okay? Because we take X-rays now in milliseconds, fractions of seconds. Boom, we've got a picture. 30 minutes, right? So this photo that we have here is the first documented X-ray exam, but what's most important is that this was the first photograph of a medical procedure as it was being conducted. Prior to that, there were no photos. This is the very first one of a medical procedure as it was happening. Okay. Their hairstyle too is pretty modern, right? Sideburns, oh, never mind. Okay. So Roentgen decided to call it X because at that time it was unknown. It wasn't cathode rays, it was something different. And because of its unknown properties and characteristics, he decided to call it X for unknown. But now the name stuck, we call it X-rays. And when Marie Curie came along with Pierre Curie, they said, okay, well, this is very similar to what we're studying. We're going to call it, because they were studying radium at that time, remember? So they said, we're going to call this radiation. So it has several names. It's called X-rays, it's called radiation, it's called Roentgen rays as well. Wilhelm Roentgen was also the first to win a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1901. When was X-rays discovered? November 8, what?
1895.
1895.
Mm-hmm.
94, 95?
95.
95. Only 6 years later, he gets an award for his discovery. Pretty amazing, right? Some old school X-ray units, everything was in black. It just, when I see that, it looks like a death machine. Okay? But now when you look at X-ray rooms, everything is white, cleaned out, pristine. It just looks sanitary. It just looks very clean. But that also scares me too. It looks too clean, and I'm a little bit fearful. I like a little bit of color in there. The generator in which generate the X-ray, and they manipulated the kilovoltage and also milliamperage to create the strengths of the different X-rays. And as you can see now, our control panel is all digital, and it's pretty fancy. No knobs, just a bunch of buttons that you push. Roentgen's original X-ray machine, pretty archaic, right? Made out of wood mostly. It looks something like this, okay? This is what general X-ray rooms look like. It can be very simple, it can be very complex. This is a very simple type of X-ray room. You can do examinations on the table, and they also have a special unit here in which you can do X-rays of your face and your jaw. Have you guys ever had a Panorex done for dental work? Yeah. Okay, so that's a Panorex machine. Okay. X-ray room with many more equipment, control rooms. Again, what we have here is very simplified, but this is a control room with the consoles that will operate more than 2 X-ray units at a time. So again, it can be very simple or very complex depending on what the X-ray machines are used for. Okay. Another X-ray unit here where they perform fluoroscopic procedures. When we're looking at the GI system, or maybe the biliary or urinary system, it's a little bit more complex. Okay, very simple X-ray room here. A control panel that allows you to manipulate your current and your voltage. So, when you guys come into the program, again, it's not as simple as pushing buttons, because there are some calculations that you need to make to determine the correct milliamperes and kilovoltage to use when X-raying certain parts. And you also got to have the understanding of what, anytime that you manipulate those factors, you're also manipulating and controlling patient exposure. Remember, I told you guys this in the beginning. Not only are we generating images, but you're also manipulating the dose of the patient that they are receiving. And as we know, radiation can cause biological effects. So we've got to be conscious and have a full understanding of what these buttons and knobs mean. All right. So let's go ahead and introduce you to some basic radiology terminology. The first one here is radiology. Radiology is the medical specialty in which X-rays, radium, and radioactive substances are applied in the diagnosis and treatment of the patient. What's missing up there? Because we talked about the different modalities. This is only covering the radiation aspect of it. What else are we using to create images?
Sound waves.
Sound waves, and what else?
Magnetics.
And magnetic resonance, right? Mm-hmm. So, this is a term that's slowly making its way outside of our vocabulary. Okay, it's not as common as it was 10 or 15 years ago. Because yes, we are now employing sound waves as well as magnetic resonance and radio frequencies to create images, in addition to what's listed up there. So the more appropriate term that we're going to use is diagnostic imaging, because now it incorporates those two things we were talking about: sound, magnets, and magnets in also with radio frequencies. Okay. So when you go to a hospital now, very rare that they will say, okay, we need you to go to radiology to get your images done. You don't see radiology as much as you used to. Now you will see signages that says diagnostic imaging or medical imaging. Okay. And although we are utilizing sound waves and magnetic resonance and radio frequencies to generate images, the doctor for this specialty is still known as a radiologist. Is still known as a radiologist. Okay? So that's your physician who applies any form of radiation and the other modalities that we talked about there in the diagnosis and treatment of a disease. These are doctors. They still have to go to pre-med, medical school, and then go into their specialty, which takes another 6 or 7 years, in addition to what they've done previously to become a radiologist. So you're talking about someone who's been in school for about 11 or 12 years to get their MD in radiology. How are we doing, guys? Any questions? All right. Now let's talk about the radiographer. This is us. This is what you're going to school for. A radiographer is a skilled person qualified by education to provide patient services using imaging modalities. That's the first part of this definition. The second part of this definition says, as directed by a physician qualified to order and or perform radiographic procedures. Just like everything else, we cannot perform procedures without a prescription or an order from a physician. We are doing this under the direction and discretion of a doctor. All right? So first thing I do is before I even take an x-ray on a patient, I am going to make sure that there is an order for this particular patient, and I'm also going to read off what kind of procedure the doctor wants. You follow? Just like nurses or anybody else in the hospital, you cannot perform a procedure without an order. Plain and simple. Okay? We're also known as radiologic technologists. That's the name of the program, radiologic technology. The individual who's performing radiologic technology is a radiologic technologist. Okay? Too many syllables. We say rad tech. Can you say rad tech?
Rad
Everybody, rad tech.
Rad tech.
Or imaging technologist, which is more appropriate, or x-ray technologist, okay? See anything unique about this?